Hi everybody, I'm Dr. Eidelman, and I'm here today to talk to you about natural treatments for the viral infection that's going around. And I want to say that it's like the unicorn in the room. Nobody really sees it and nobody's really talking about it, but there's wonderful news. And there's been great news about particularly vitamin D and other natural ways to heal. But then very recently, there was a double-blind, placebo-controlled research study from Spain that's showing really unbelievably dramatic results, and that I'll be telling you about in just a moment. But I want to lead up to that in a certain way by showing you how we got there, more or less. So here's something, this is from the Daily Mail online, an English tabloid newspaper that has a terrifying chart that shows how COVID-19 patients who end up in hospital may be almost certain to die if they have a vitamin D deficiency. And this was from a study in Indonesia that showed that people who had really low vitamin D levels in their blood basically died at a very high level. And the people who were sick and maybe hospitalized but did not die, they had normal levels. So the risk of dying was greatly increased if you were very low on vitamin D. And so that's one study, but there's a lot of information. Here's something from News Medical Life Science that's talking about a study in Dallas that shows that vitamin D deficiency is related to higher death rates from COVID-19. And here's from a WebMD, more vitamin D, lower risk of severe COVID-19, but they have a question mark around it. And then there's from SciTech Daily, vitamin D linked to low coronavirus death rate. And this is from a study in England. And then we have from the New York Post, people with low vitamin D levels more likely to die from coronavirus study finds. And this is another study from England. And here we've got from the USA Today, can vitamin D help with symptoms of COVID-19? Possibly it's key to helping your immune system function. And they go into some details of how and why this happens that I'll go into in future videos. So here's something from PubMed, evidence that vitamin D supplementation could reduce risk of influenza and COVID-19 infections and death. And then now when you get to Yale, they're saying vitamin D deficiency in COVID-19, is there a connection with a question mark? Yale medical doctors say the evidence is slim, and that's, of course, there aren't really very many studies, except for the one brand new placebo-controlled double-blind study that came out after this. But let's see, and then here's CNN, vitamin D's effect on COVID-19 may be exaggerated. The conventional news media basically don't want people to know that there are easy ways to get well. Here's ABC News, again, mainstream media, vitamin D deficiency unlikely to fully explain COVID-19's effect on people of color. And I'll have more to say about that in future videos also. So now the one thing that nobody's really talked about here is interviewing or talking to doctors who've used vitamin D in their practice over the years, such as myself. Now, I can personally tell you that at the very onset of the first symptoms of a viral infection, if you take a very high dose of vitamin D3, particularly one that melts in your mouth, absorbs in your mouth, then that will knock it out. That's been my experience. That's something I learned from Dr. Joe Mercola, who's been one of the leading alternative doctors online, mercola.com. And I met him before he gave a talk at one of our conferences. I'll talk more about the alternative doctors and all the conferences that we've had over the years. So anyway, many patients that I've worked with who came to me with chronic infections, and when I advised them to take vitamin D3 on a daily basis, maybe only one person out of 20, 30, 40 people like that didn't get good results. Otherwise, everybody else, their viral infections, their chronic viral infections stopped when they put their vitamin D3 in place. But people will say, oh, but there's no placebo-controlled studies. Well, now there is. So the first clinical trial on vitamin D therapy for COVID-19. This says the first clinical trial to support vitamin D therapy for COVID-19, as if there might have been others that didn't support it, but this is the first one, period. So the first clinical trial does support it, and basically what happened was they had a group of 76 patients who were confirmed with COVID-19 and were sick enough to be admitted into the hospital. And so they basically took 50 of these people, 2/3, and put them on a high dose of vitamin D3 metabolite. And then they put 26 or 1/3 on no vitamin D metabolite. And then of the group of 50 who were hospitalized, one of them ended up being admitted to the intensive care unit and survived. And of the 26 who did not get it, 13 patients were admitted to the intensive care unit, and 2 of them died. So that's a huge difference, showing an incredible benefit of taking high-dose vitamin D. And this was not at the very earliest. They were already admitted to the hospital sick. So this is the first placebo-controlled, double-blind study on vitamin D in COVID-19, and maybe at all in any condition, but and giving great results. So I expect that there are going to be many more studies like this, and that the results will be consistent with this. And everybody can be their own trial of one. There's even though, like, let's say in research, you want to have the larger number of people in the research, the better, that it's also known that you can have an N of 1 research study. So me or you, we can be the N of 1 ourselves. So if you have on hand vitamin D and you feel the first signs of an infection coming on, and you take a high dose like 50,000 international units right away, then there's a good chance that it will go away right away. So, vitamin D. So that's the first of 3 things I'm going to tell you about today. So the second one we're going to go to is vitamin C. And vitamin C is really important. In fact, when Dr. Mercola gave his talk at the American College for Advancement in Medicine long time ago, must have been around maybe 06 or 07, and he started his talk by saying, oh, you know how Linus Pauling and others say that vitamin C is good for many, many different things, and he went through a long list. And he said, well, there they were right, but they're only off one letter. It's vitamin D that does all these things. And he was joking. And vitamin D does do all those things, but vitamin C does all those things too. And in fact, vitamin C, well, let's just say that it does stimulate the immune system and help you fight viral illnesses. And this is something that does come from NIH, and it's giving the rationale, and it's basically saying there's insufficient data for the panel to recommend either for or against. So they're taking a kind of a neutral position, not positive. And then here's from the USA Today, fact check, could taking vitamin C cure or prevent COVID-19? And basically they're claiming, the experts say, there is no evidence that vitamin C helps treat COVID-19. And again, we have the problem that, yes, there aren't really studies. There are not very many studies, but actually there are studies. And so orthomolecular.org is one of the places that has these kind of studies. And let's see here. So here's the application of high-dose intravenous vitamin C in severe respiratory infections. So here's a study, and it's out of China, but basically they're giving the in vivo and in vitro and going into the theoretical basis and then the clinical evidence of IV intravenous vitamin C, and the studies are positive. And then the question really, they're saying research on different doses, because that's one of the questions, is how much do you really give? And so here's an example of coronavirus treatment in New York, treating COVID-19 with massive doses of vitamin C. Now I had another one, but it disappeared, where they were talking about in Shanghai, China, that they've approved of the use of intravenous vitamin C in the treatment of COVID. And in fact, I've been giving, well, I first started giving intravenous doses of vitamin C back around 1990, and I would give them for the common cold and the flu. And if you get it right away, it does tend to knock it out. If you don't get it right away, you could still give treatments that would reduce the symptoms and speed the healing. So if you're worried about somebody with COVID who is in danger of maybe even dying, and you give them high doses of intravenous vitamin C, it's working. And it's working in New York and Peking, Beijing and Shanghai and Mexico and Europe. So it's widely used around the world, but it's basically been overlooked in the United States. So, okay, vitamin C, very critical. And it's really great news. Now we've got that research, the placebo-controlled research showing how much the high dose of vitamin D helps. And if you give the high dose of vitamin D and the high dose of intravenous vitamin C, and if you put some zinc in there, zinc would be the third nutrient that I would like to mention today, that's been shown to help to fight the virus. It's usually taken with hydroxychloroquine to help get it into the cell to kill the virus. There are other things that can help bring it into the cell, including quercetin, which is in apples or some supplements, and ECGC, which comes from green tea. So these are the three nutrients that I recommend to start with: vitamin D, vitamin D3, vitamin C, which you would take as a preventive anywhere from 2,000 milligrams, 2 grams, up to, say, 8 grams a day. If you're not already taking a high dose, start at 2 grams a day and slowly build up. And if it upsets your tummy, then take it down to where it no longer upsets your tummy. But if you get a decent amount of vitamin C in you, this is going to protect you from being infected. And if you do get infected, it will reduce the severity of it. And then zinc with the quercetin or ECGC. So that's the great news. We're going to come back here to the unicorn in the room. So you can heal. You can prevent the COVID-19. You can heal from it. These are the beginnings of how to do it, and I'll be talking a lot more in future broadcasts. Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye.